Welcome back. In the last video, I began to talk with you about the Old Testament, the Gospel of Matthew, and something called intertextuality. I want to go on in this video and say more about that. But before I do, in case you're wondering why I'm spending my video time with you this week, digging deeper into these three things, it's for this reason. Most people have heard or read at some time that Matthew is the most Jewish of the Gospels. And though some would say that the Gospel according to John is also very Jewish, and I would be one of them, Matthew's Gospel is very much a Gospel influenced by Judaism, and that influence is shown in several ways, but principally, I would argue, in the ways in which Matthew's Gospel consistently interacts and shows Jesus interacting with the Old Testament. New Testament scholars talk about those ways using a blanket term for all of them, the term intertextuality. To remind you again, intertextuality is the way the New Testament text makes use of another text, an earlier text, from inside or outside the Old Testament, either directly or indirectly. And given that definition, in a very real way, intertextuality is a part of both the world behind the text and the world inside the text. But intertextuality is only made possible in the Gospel of Matthew or in any other part of the New Testament because a text from the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible or some other earlier writing was already available to the writer of the New Testament. It was known. And that's why I've chosen to talk about it this week, because intertextuality, the way Matthew uses the Old Testament, informs, influences, and shapes almost every part of Matthew. So let's continue to dig deeper into the ways that happens and talk more in this video about intertextuality and the variety of ways in Matthew and other texts in the New Testament that intertextuality takes place. Let me first list and then talk with you about 6 principal ways that intertextuality takes place in Matthew, and use some examples from other texts in the New Testament as I do that as well. Intertextuality can take place, first of all, through quotation. Secondly, through citation, citation. Thirdly, through allusion, allusion. And by the way, remember that you can see a script for each of my videos following the videos, so you'll see the words again and spelled correctly in the script if you need another look at them. First way, quotation. Second way, citation. Third way, allusion. 3 ways intertextuality can happen. Here are 3 more. Intertextuality can take place through an echo, through a type, or through an instance of typology, and finally through what's called a resonance. There are more ways that intertextuality can happen besides these 6, but these 6 form a good list to start with because they are 6 principal ways intertextuality happens in Matthew and throughout the New Testament. So now that I've listed the 6 ways, let's talk in this video about the first 2 types of intertextuality, quotation and citation. Quotation takes place when one writer uses the exact words of another writer, an earlier writer, and there's a direct connection between the 2 texts in terms of wording. A quotation reproduces the exact words of an earlier text, or very close to the exact words of an earlier text. So as we saw in the first video for this week, a New Testament author, Matthew, uses a quotation from the Old Testament that is on Jesus' lips as he writes in chapter 13 an account of Jesus' words where Jesus quotes from the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament in chapter 6. But intertextuality in the New Testament, through quotation, happens not only when New Testament authors quote the Old Testament, it happens when the author of a New Testament text quotes any earlier text. In the book of Acts, for instance, in chapter 17, in a speech in Athens, Paul quotes a Greek text from a Greek writer whose name is Epimenides. Epimenides lived around 600 BC. And Paul quotes Epimenides as he speaks to some Athenians and some Athenian philosophers and reminds them that, as I'm quoting Paul's words now, as some of your own poets have said, Paul's reminding them, using the words of a poet Epimenides, that God is a God in whom, and I'm quoting Paul again now, we live and move and have our being. Of course, as Paul quotes the words, he doesn't mention Epimenides by name. Maybe he chooses to do that, or maybe he simply remembers the words and their Greek origin, but not the author. In any case, here's an example, a clear example, and there are more, of a quotation in the New Testament that comes from a source outside the Old Testament. So that's quotation. Let's talk now about citation. Citation takes place when one writer paraphrases or uses a small piece of a text from another writer. Some New Testament scholars use the word citation as a synonym for quotation, but other scholars, and I include myself with them, make a distinction between a quotation, which uses identical or almost identical wording, and a citation, which is really a paraphrase, or a few borrowed words around which a paraphrase is built from an earlier text. Such paraphrases in terms of the Old Testament or the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, were already being made before Matthew in early Second Temple Jewish writings, like the Targums, for instance, which are early paraphrasing translations of the Old Testament from Hebrew into other languages, like Aramaic, for instance. And in a very real sense, the Septuagint, that's the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, Koine Greek, the common language of the intertestamental and period in first century. The Septuagint is a paraphrase too, and most of the quotations in the New Testament are taken from the Septuagint, probably for two reasons. First, because it was the common language of the first century, and second, because it is in many senses a very good paraphrase of the Old Testament, and one that was very familiar to diaspora Jews, Jews living outside of Judea and Israel. In Matthew chapter 12 and verses 18 through 21, there's a citation from Isaiah 42. Let's take a look at it. It says in Matthew, "Here is my servant, whom I have chosen, my beloved, with whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he will proclaim justice to the Gentiles. He will not wrangle or cry aloud, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. He will not break a bruised reed or quench a smoldering wick until he brings justice to victory, and in his name the Gentiles will hope." But Matthew's citation paraphrases and does not exactly match either the Hebrew text or the Septuagint text. In fact, in places in its wording, it doesn't match any text that we know. Not exactly. So it is a citation that Matthew may himself have paraphrased, or it may come from a text that paraphrased the verses from Isaiah 42 that are used in the citation. Here's another example from the book of Jude. In the book of Jude, the author cites a text that paraphrases closely material from a book titled First Enoch, a Jewish apocalyptic text, like the book of Revelation, except First Enoch comes from the intertestamental period, the period between Malachi and the first writing of the New Testament. Jude warns his audience in verse 4 not to be like men who ignore the coming judgment that awaits, and I'm quoting now from Jude, ungodly persons who pervert the grace of God into licentiousness and deny our only Master and Lord, Jesus Christ. And then a little later on in Jude, in verses 14 and 15, Jude writes, it was about these men that Enoch, in the 7th generation from Adam, prophesied, saying, see, the Lord is coming with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on all and to convict everyone of all their deeds of ungodliness. And while that's not an exactly identical quotation, it is certainly a citation that paraphrases the text of Enoch closely. First Enoch is part of what's called the Old Testament pseudepigrapha. That's a library of written texts written in the name of famous figures of Judaism by anonymous Jewish writers to enable the voice of those famous figures to speak as if they were still living in the intertestamental period. So the author of First Enoch uses the pen name of Enoch, a man who never died according to the book of Genesis. And the message of First Enoch, like the Apocalypse of John, the book of Revelation, is one in which First Enoch describes how God will judge the ungodly and reward the righteous. And the text of First Enoch in chapter 1 says, behold, he comes with myriads of his holy ones to execute judgment on all and to destroy all the wicked and to convict all flesh for all the wicked deeds that they have done and the proud and hard words that wicked sinners spoke against him. Close, but not a quotation, rather a paraphrase, like Matthew's paraphrase in chapter 12. In the next video, I'll go on and talk with you about two more kinds of intertextuality, and show you the ways that Matthew and some other New Testament writers use them as they connect the world behind the text to the world inside the text.